IVM.
Some time ago, 5 successful restaurateurs came together to form the Colaba Cartel. The founders of the table, Gauri Devi Dayal and J. Yusuf, partnered with the founders of Woodside Inn, Abhishek Honawar, Pankil Shah and Sumit Gambhir to open a new restaurant in Colaba. If you've ever dreamed of opening a restaurant or love eating out, you want to listen in. The Colaba Cartel. This exclusive 10-part series is hosted by Gauri Devi Dayal and Amit Doshi.
Welcome to the 8th episode of the Colaba Cartel. Once you make a restaurant, Gauri, you need to talk to people about it. What's involved in doing that?
Well, that's actually a lot more complicated than just going out and shouting about it. So it involves creating a brand you will talk about, figuring out a strategy for how you want to position the brand, to create maximum impact, working on tactical aspects like social media, PR, websites, apps, and so much more.
Wow, okay, let's dive right into this. It sounds like it's going to be a really fascinating conversation. So besides our co-host Gauri, we have Pankil and Abhishek from the Cartel. And so we have an outside hitter with us today again, Dallas Fernandes from the Dallas Company. Let's get on with it. Welcome, Dallas, first, since you are new on the show. And hi, everybody.
Hello.
Hey.
It's good to get you guys back. And so you know what? I want to kind of just jump into the first question as the most open-ended questions of all. How do you communicate the concept of a restaurant? Is there a process to this, or is this something that you guys just kind of, take it as it comes? I mean, what is the way that you kind of go about doing something like this? Pankil, you want to address this?
Sure. So I think when you're creating a restaurant and you're building the concept as a group, I think the very first and most natural thing is that it needs to be an extension of yourself. It needs to have a little bit of you in it. And of course, when you're working in a group, there needs to be elements of other people who are member of that group. Because it's only when there is that little bit of a personal touch that the restaurant develops soul. For Miss T, the concept building process was quite interesting because there were 5 minds involved and each more passionate than the other. We used a simple exercise where all of us thought of words that we felt worked with the brand that we're trying to create. Right. And, we put down these words, we came up and bounced these words off each other. Some worked for maybe 2 out of 3, some 2 out of 5, some worked for 4 out of 5, right. Some didn't work at all.
Okay.
So it was quite interesting, and I think it's important that the brand communicates what you're thinking when it comes to the experience you're trying to provide.
Isn't that, Dallas, where you kind of jumped into the picture once they put all these words together? That's, I think, when they kind of got you to start working on the concept. You want to tell us a little bit about how that happened and how you got into that?
Yeah, sure. I think it's important first to have a broad positioning of how you're seeing the restaurant. And post that, what happens is you sort of arrive at tone of voice and maybe design language, all that flows once you've got the positioning in place. So it's very important to sort of first everyone agree on the way you want to position the restaurant, and then take it forward from there,
So that I think is the keyword exercise that they did, where they kind of figured out the words that they want to kind of push, kind of got them to the point where, okay, this is the way we want to position the restaurant. Sure. Right? What did you do after you got that? I mean, what were the next steps that you took in terms of designing the logos, the overall design of the menus, just all of that, the look and feel that you put together for them?
I think what happened once we had the positioning in place, I think we were pretty much all clear that we wanted it to have a certain feminine tone and manner, essentially. Mm-hmm. And then we took that from there, almost the qualities of the kind of place that we wanted it to be, in terms of the name as well. So we first started with the name, We first zeroed in on a few options. We went through a few rounds of naming the entire restaurant. And once we zeroed in on that, we sort of went forward with the designing part. Basically.
Awesome, great. So we'll get back to more specifics about the process itself a little bit later on. But let me ask you guys a little bit more about the activities that occur in this marketing and social media and all of this when you're starting to communicate a brand, right? So what role does legacy play in terms of branding a restaurant? All of you guys are extremely experienced entrepreneurs. You've been working in this space for a number of years at this point in time. I mean, how does that play into the branding of a restaurant itself, right? I mean, do you ride to a certain degree on the previous successes, or is this a new ballgame altogether? How do you look at that?
I think coming from a background in this business, you carry some sense of responsibility. You carry some sense of delivery that you have to match. I think a restaurant, like Pankaj said, is a very personalized thing, and you have to have that personal touch in everything that you do. And I think that you have to have the ability to recreate that with everything that you do. I think that's one of the fundamentals. And I think Gauri also had a point on this.
I mean, I think that in our case, we've got very different brands between us, existing brands. And what we're trying to create here is something different.
Right.
So, yes, you want to leverage your existing brands to some extent. But at the same time, you want to distinguish this. If you're setting out to create something new, you want to distinguish it from your existing brand. So to minimize that comparison. But I think that where the legacy comes in, as Abhishek said, is that you have established yourself as a provider of a certain level of quality, experience, etc. And that is what, you want people to continue to expect, and you want to be able to continue to deliver on. So while the brand, the concept, the cuisine, etc. might be different from anything you have currently, you want to leverage your, existing platforms of communication with the diners and do it in a way that you've been doing successfully so far, but talk about a different story.
Do you think audiences or basically diners are looking for, when they're looking to sample new restaurants, especially something like Misty, right? Which is it's not like, it's a experience, right? I mean, like, you're not just going there for like a casual kind of like, let's just grab a bite. But when people are looking for that, are they looking for restaurants from people who they have been to before, or other restaurateurs who they have gone to and had great experiences before? Or do you think that is not so?
I think that people don't always know who the restaurateur is actually behind a restaurant. So we're obviously in the industry and we know that, the whole time, and you assume people know that, but actually a lot of people don't know who's behind. I mean, for example, if my mother went out to eat, she doesn't, she's not sort of savvy about the industry to know who the restaurateurs are. So I think people are just curious to try something new. Food's a big part of people's life now in terms of, just as a lifestyle rather, eating out has become a bigger part of people's lifestyle. And I think people are always keen to try new concepts out, new places out. They're just looking for something different. And then it's up to that restaurant to deliver to get them back in. But I don't think it's so much people thinking about what's been done before necessarily.
But do you think that it helps from your own perspective in terms of how you're going to go about communicating certain things, the fact that you've done this before? Or you've done this in another venue, does that help from your own kind of processes and that kind of thing?
I think so. I think it certainly helps having the experience of understanding how different sets of people react to different modes of communication, to different branding elements. There are, something as simple as a menu design. People react to menu designs differently. Menu design is an important part of leading people to consume what in a manner that you want them to consume. So, yes, having that experience helps. Having said that, it's always good to have new ideas. And I think when you're starting off a new restaurant, as opposed to having, legacy with you or having that experience with you, it should be examined with an entirely fresh outlook, as opposed to just saying, okay, this has been done before, so let's do this, it'll work.
Right.
I think there's some level of excitement should always be there. I think,
let's not exciting business. If it's not exciting, then what's the...
Yes and no. Yes and no. In a sense, as it's very different. They say something about Sachin Tendulkar, right? Like, he's such a great cricketer, but he still has this, childish way and flair and excitement of still scoring, 50 in his second last match or whatever that was, And I think that excitement is what should always exist, and that's the magic. That's the part that kind of changes things. So yes, the experience is important. I mean, everything that was said so far is very, very important. But that excitement of delivering that new thing, should always exist. And it should be innocent. It should be, mindful. It should come from, a place of curiosity.
Great. Did you want to?
No, I think the point is that we all have existing audiences between our various restaurants, and in that sense, you've got a ready audience. But that you who's obviously already knows that you're working on something. There's something on the anvil and is excited about it. But it's equally important to then deliver. I mean, that's the key thing. So you might be able to sort of leverage what you've got, but to not that could all sort of fall, that could backfire as well. If this new, concept that you're creating doesn't actually live up to the expectations of yourself, but also of your audience.
Right, right. Okay, great. So actually, Dallas, you've been awfully quiet, so let me ask you some stuff. When you work with restaurateurs like this group, the Colaba Cartel, basically what kind of, when you want to design a logo for them, right? So they gave you a certain kind of brief, right? At that point in time, what do you do? What's your process like at that point, right? Where do you go from there in terms of like, okay, now I need to start kind of like, putting final designs into place and stuff like that. Where do you go from there?
Okay, so first what happens is, we after the brief is given, you sort of sit and analyze it and see if it's sort of sharp enough, to get a really... because sometimes often clients aren't too sure about what they what they have in mind essentially for the place. It could be pretty broad, which then you don't end up with something that's very convincing to either party. Basically you're not convinced with it yourself,
right?
And neither is the client essentially. So if you get something that's pretty broad, then it's up to us, possibly the branding specialist or designers, to try and sharpen that kind of brief. So we go back to the client with certain thoughts or processes that will help them achieve something that's a lot sharper, something that makes it much easier. And then when you go back with a branding or logo identity, it's much easier than to sell that, essentially, because everyone's on board.
So I guess one question I do have to ask, though, is when you're working with guys like this who have such definite ideas about what they want to do, how much freedom do you get, and how much are they kind of like pushing you into particular directions?
Well, I guess
directions which you might not necessarily always agree with.
You can be very honest.
We're looking away.
Yeah. like or blue dollar logo, man. Like you get that kind of thing.
No, Pankil and the entire neighborhood team, they've always been fantastic as far as working on briefs go. So that level of freedom is amazing, essentially, that you have with them. One part is great that they are pretty sure about what they have in mind. But even within that kind of framework, there's a lot you can play with, essentially. So in that sense, there's a lot of freedom working with them on assignments.
Do you want to give us dirt from some other people who you might have worked with, who might not be as good to work with?
No, not really.
Well, maybe not anonymous dirt, maybe not specific dirt.
I don't really think of anything as dirt, essentially.
Okay.
I think every person and individual has very specific thoughts of what they have in mind, So, I mean, no two people are like, some people are quite definite in terms of this is exactly what they want to see, Maybe that makes it, maybe then there's a little less challenge for me in that sense. But I guess if that's what they have in mind and if they're that clear about it, and if it works for them, then why not?
Okay, so then you'll put the blue in the logo.
Sure.
All right, cool. All right, so we're going to take...
If I feel it sort of won't take away from the integrity of what they have in mind and things like that.
Okay, cool. Great. Awesome, man. Yeah. So we're going to take a quick break right now. We're going to come back and talk more specifically about how they're going to be branding Miss T and communicating the brand itself. And we're going to talk more about that restaurant. We'll be back right after this.
Hi, my name is Anupam Gupta. I'm B50 on Twitter. I am the host of Paisa Vaisa, the show that talks money. On my show, I speak to experts from every field of money and finance, from stock markets, equities, debt funds, credit cards, life insurance, every possible area of money and finance that you can think of. We even did an episode on cryptocurrency. I've got fantastic guests from mutual funds to personal finance experts everywhere. Robo-advisory, startups, just name it, we've got it. At Paisa Vaisa, we help you make smart decisions about money. You work hard for money. Now make your money work hard for you. New episodes out every Monday, and you can listen to my show on the IVM Podcast app or any other podcasting app that you have.
So welcome back, everybody. So you know what? The first question is, let's talk about specifically Miss T. How are we positioning Miss T, right? What are the ideas behind it that you guys have in terms of how you want to position that restaurant?
So our thoughts began with Miss T. Specifically, we wanted to do something that was fresh, that was new, that was exciting, that had never been done before by us or by anybody in India. And I think we believe we have agreed and come together on the same and aligned our thoughts on that idea. For Miss T, the idea was, the core food being the Asian Golden Triangle, which is Burma, Northern Thailand, Vietnam, that region. The cuisine from that region is, very palatable from an Indian perspective. It is relatable. It's fun to eat, and it's not been done to that extent in India before. So we had the cuisine orientation in place. We wanted to ensure that we had a great bar experience where when my wife and I want to go out and have a nice drink and without climbing over somebody else's shoulder and waiting 30 minutes to get a nice, very, very nice world-class cocktail. Very few and far places in Bombay. So that was the basic orientation of the brand, and that's what we're looking to build.
Okay. Do you want to talk a little bit more about the look of the place and how you're thinking about that kind of thing as well from the positioning perspective, right?
Well, I think as far as design and interior design was concerned, as Pankil mentioned, we were hovering around the Southeast Asia region, the Golden Triangle, and we also wanted to have that bar flair.
Okay.
That bar flair, one of the important parts of this entire experience was this food and beverage experience was to have a setting that was intimate, that was cozy, that was sexy,
right?
And at the same time, very hospitable and generous. Mm-hmm. So these were the general, words that we outlined for the feeling in the restaurant, and I think what we're closing in, more and more as we go towards the opening, I feel like we're trying to own that feeling a little, at every stage as far as design is concerned.
Cool. Gauri, when did you decide how you were going to position this restaurant in the market, right? Was that something that happened while you were conceiving of the idea itself, or is that something that kind of organically flowed from the subsequent discussions that you guys had after you put together your list of things to send to Dallas?
No, I think that's one of the first things that we had to do. And I don't know how to do casual. So, no, it's, jokes apart. I think we realized sort of, the location kind of is what drives everything, really. So, given where this space is going to be, we felt that Colaba could do with a lot more sort of restaurants, as Pankil and Abhishek described, with a sort of, slightly, refined, but at the same time chic, sexy sort of space that, you would want to go out, whether you're going on a date night or you're going out on a girls' night or you're sort of, having, just a great lunch. So I think that we established that we wanted to do great quality food, and that does come at a certain price point.
Right.
And I think that that's where it's, so even the design obviously has to reflect that experience. The food, the bar program, down to like the kind of spirits you use, right? So whether you have sort of, slightly more high-end spirits, things like that. So I think we were all very clear that given the location, we wanted to be at a certain price point. And then that sort of triggers everything else, from the design brief to the interiors to everything.
So glassware, cutlery, crockery.
Right. So, Das, could you talk a little bit about that? What is different about this restaurant in terms of how you've kind of done creative work over here as opposed to some of the other things that you worked with, either for them before or just other things, right? I mean, what do you think is unique about this particular spot?
Okay, well, I'm not going to get into specifics of how this place is unique, but what's interesting is it all stemmed from, when we arrived at the whole feminine aspect and then the name as well, So once we finalized on Misty, which is an interesting play on words in that sense, it's Misty, Misty, right? Which, conjures up images that are like shadowy or dreamy, that kind of space essentially, along with Miss MISST, who's almost like this fictitious individual, female, and the T in that could possibly stand for tantalizing, thrilling, well-traveled in that sense, So we put that in place. And now we're working on imagery that best encapsulates that, for the place, essentially.
All right, let's pull back a little bit, right? So, I mean, let's kind of look at what the point of this episode is. We're trying to talk about marketing, communication, positioning, and brand, right? So, what goes into marketing? When you guys think of marketing a restaurant, or let's take this specific restaurant, right? What are the activities that you look at over here? Do you look at these activities as individual things, or do you look at this as like some sort of an integrated strategy which you're trying to kind of push for the entire, make sure that all of these things play together, right? Whether that's advertising, whether that's PR, whether that is whatever that may be, right? I mean, like social media, whatever that is, right? I mean, like, how do you look at this?
So I think marketing is an extremely important part of any business, and restaurants more so because you have to communicate to your consumer about who you are, about what you're trying to achieve, about what you're providing to your consumer. It's like I'm inviting you to my house to have a meal, but I didn't invite you. If I didn't communicate that to you, you would not know why to come, where to go. So in different restaurants, there are different ways to brand it, to position it, and to market it. It could be as simple as, putting up a post on social media, or something even more basic. It could be word of mouth, where I take my friend loves it and takes somebody else there, and so on. And it could go all the way up to, you can flyer, you can have newspaper advertisements, TV ads.
Right.
So there is a vast number of media available that you can use to market, but it has to be very specific to the kind of brand identity that you're trying to create.
Okay. Gauri, you were going to say something.
I think that, it's kind of what Dallas touched on when it comes to him sort of creating a logo and a name. There's a character, right? And whatever that character is or that story is about this restaurant has to be one, first of all. Otherwise, what are you marketing, right? And that has to carry through in everything you're doing. So whether it's in, again, like I said, the logo, so it has to be in every aspect. So even when we're talking about interiors, there are touches which may not seem obvious to a diner, but there are touches which continue to have that sort of feminine feel.
Right.
And it's the same thing with the marketing aspect. So one thing is the story. And then I think the second part of it for me has been doing it in a creative way. And I think there's a difference between being gimmicky and being sort of creative. And at the end of the day, you have to, compared to sort of 8 years ago when we were marketing our first restaurant, and today it's a completely different playing field.
Right.
And there's so much more like stimuli and so many more other, restaurant brands out there that you're sort of, trying to sort of shine out up against. So it's really important to be creative about how you capture people's attention.
So let me ask you, so let's go through each of the kind of, avenues of marketing, if you will, right? I mean, like, so the obvious ones are like, PR, right? So when it comes to PR, you would work with food bloggers, or you work with different media agencies, or you work with different writers, and you kind of do some outreach around there, right? How do you guys approach that? I mean, like, what are your thoughts around that? I think, Gauri, you want to approach this first?
I think it's important, firstly, to identify who your target audience is, and then accordingly approach the right forms of sort of communication that are going to reach that audience,
right.
So, for example, if you're going to be a slightly more high-end space, you might look at the more sort of luxury-focused publications.
Well, let's talk about Misty specifically, right? Who do you think makes sense over here?
Well, I mean, like Gauri mentioned, without getting into specifics, we'd be focused on publications that would reach the audience that we think are going to be dining
right.
in our space. We're based in Colaba. Colaba is a neighborhood of Bombay that you cannot miss if you ever visit Bombay.
Right.
And, people who live in Colaba, in that neighborhood, are important, clients to us. So that neighborhood would stretch, further into North Bombay for us. And we would try to, use mediums that would communicate to this.
I mean, if you want to get into specific names, I'll like.
No, I'm not asking for specific names.
But
I mean, like, what are your ideas for like this? I mean, like you.
So you go into say you might look at a luxury travel magazine, right? That focuses on sort of great quality experiences. Like travel guides, for example, there are travel guides that focus on backpackers, and there are travel guides that focus on slightly more sort of
boutique luxury travel.
Yeah, boutique luxury.
Right.
So again, so that's the thing, that you're going with an audience that you're thinking about your audience all the time.
Right.
And for example, even the newspapers. So you look at a Mumbai Mirror. I mean, that is the quintessential sort of tabloid for every sort of
everybody
Bombay person to read. And at the end of the day, I am a restaurant in Bombay, so that is very clearly who I'm targeting. So that's.
What about paid advertising? Do you look at, is paid advertising like, putting an ad in a newspaper, doing like online Google ads?
We've actually done that for Woodside Inn. We used to, when we opened in Andheri, we ran a banner with Zomato at that point. Now, again, it's not a traditional paid advertisement.
No, that's still, it's placement. You're paying for placement, yes.
No, you're paying for a banner. So you're actually...
Oh, okay, so not even placement. You're paying for a banner.
It's not placement, it's banner. You're very obviously advertising to get eyeballs onto your brand. And it has worked.
Okay.
It has worked. But I think that has to do more with being a part of your strategy, and depends on who you're trying to target
Right.
again. Because, non-traditional forms more and more are getting important. And especially with Miss T, we have this idea of a contemporary, sexy, very fine establishment. And I think the mindset that we want to get across is also like that. So for us, having, the backgrounds that we do, having existing restaurants, for Miss T especially, I don't think paid advertising is something that we'd want to look at.
And I think that we're a very Colaba-centric space,
Right.
and we are all Colaba-centric brands
Right.
A lot
and
of-
businesses. So I think that before you get into sort of paid things, you need to maximize that existing leverage
Right.
that you have to the full.
Yeah, sure. That makes sense, right? I mean, given the fact that you're already there. But, you brought up Zomato, right? So, I mean, just maybe basically, so that brings up a question in my mind, right? How important have apps like Zomato, Easy Diner, all of these kind of become in basically being able to get your word out, right? I mean, those seem to be things which are, I mean, again, those are new things, right? So, I mean, they probably were not around when you started the restaurant as opposed to now. So how do you deal with that? I mean, what are your ideas around those kinds of, the open review apps and listing apps and stuff like that?
I think it's extremely important that they play a very important role in that bridge between the consumer and the space, because at the end of the day, it's opening up new channels for you to connect with your consumer.
Right.
If somebody leaves a bad review on TripAdvisor, Zomato, whatever it might be, or has negative feedback and they've gone on to logged in and left you something, I would take it as critical feedback and work on it.
Right.
Connect with that consumer, make sure that they come back and understand the experience that we're trying to provide in the best way that we can provide it to them. You are going to have bad days in the restaurant,
Of course.
like in life. And, it is always important, and most guests will understand that. But this allows us that interaction with the consumer, which otherwise we might have lost out.
Okay.
I just want to add one thing to that actually, which is that, again, going back to your target audience, there is a different audience that, for example, will look at a Zomato before going to a restaurant and maybe look at a TripAdvisor. And that's something that I've noticed. And I feel like, the kind of feedback that you get, for example, on Zomato might be that people are very price conscious.
Right.
So when you know that you're going to be at a slightly higher price point, then you have to recognize that maybe advertising on a Zomato is not my
Right.
way forward. So it's I think everything hinges on recognizing who your audience is,
Right.
and focusing all your marketing on avenues that they are going to be accessing.
You know what? That's actually a great spot to kind of end this part of the discussion. What I want to ask each of you now, right? I mean, I kind of want each of you to kind of give me one example of a PR strategy, a marketing strategy, a social media strategy, some sort of restaurant activity, something that you have done in this space over the last 10 years in your case, 8 years in your case. I'm not sure how many years in your
18.
case, Dallas, 18 years in your case, but something of that nature which you think has worked really, really well. So, you know what? Let's start off with you, Dallas, since you are our guest.
All right. Well, I guess the most recent example would be for Bombay Vintage, which is
Okay.
again by the same group, essentially. So we decided to, since the place is called Bombay Vintage, we didn't want to keep it extremely old world, in that sense, in tone and voice. So while we used imagery that was from the past, we decided to take a younger, more contemporary, almost fun spin on, what they were trying to communicate, essentially. So we used visuals that were vintage, but we got these little quirky, funky one-liners that went with them.
Okay.
And we still do that, and that sort of seemed to have resonated with the patrons at the restaurant as well.
That sounds
That's
really interesting. So you're kind of juxtaposing
Sure.
old school imagery with
Yes.
new captioning.
Exactly.
Exactly. Interesting. Very cool. Gauri, you want to mention something?
I would probably talk about the Table Farm.
Yeah.
It essentially started off as our weekend home, where we were just growing whatever was growing, and whatever was left over was coming to the restaurant, and that sort of snowballed into a bigger idea, which is what it is today, which is that it's very much a focused farming sort of space,
Right.
Keeping the restaurant in mind and growing produce for the restaurant. What I sort of realized a few years ago was that there was so much interest in it that essentially it was a brand extension for us. And the Table Farm today is an entirely independent brand,
Okay.
where we create experiences there for people who are interested in.
Oh, that's interesting.
So, it was, I think that recognizing that it is an independent sort of entity in itself was a very interesting sort of experience for me in growing the
that sounds really
business.
interesting, right? I mean, like you're taking something that you were just doing and you turn that into like, hey, this is something that everybody should do. That's awesome. Abhishek, you got an idea for us, Mr. Instagram article?
Well, Pankil, Sumit, and me, we did Woodside Inn in 2007. We launched in December 2007. We were fairly young, when we did that restaurant. And I remember the first, we were inching into the first monsoon in 2008, in somewhere around May. And we were like, holy shit, it's going to be monsoon now. It's, sales are going to plummet. We're just going to have such a hard time. So we were like, why don't we do a food festival? And, being Woodside Inn, our entire approach for the restaurant was to create a casual, friendly space where you could hang out, that had, worldly service delivery, worldly food standards, but you could essentially just hang out because Bombay lacked that. And that's where beer was our, primary beverage that showcased casualness. And to take that one step forward, we said, why don't we pair burgers with beers?
I remember those.
And that's where the Beer and Burger Festival came up. In 2008, I still remember Dallas made the first, the logo and the entire thing. And we were actually venturing into the unknown. We didn't know what this was going to turn into. What it turned into was sales went up by 30% in the first year. Second year climbed by another 24%. Year on year after that have climbed till date, by a certain percentage. And today, I think 10 years in, it's one of the most recognized food festivals in Bombay.
Well, you guys do the best burgers in town, I think. I think you guys do the best burgers. I mean, like, that's at least my...
We do.
Yeah. I believe that. I mean, like, especially during the festival, you guys have, like, all these specialty burgers and stuff like that. Those are really, really good.
Thank you. And now, I think now we have the bread comes from.
Guess where the bread comes from.
But this bread situation was way before all of these things, So that's one of the parts of our organic, journey of coming together. We've been working with the magazine Street Kitchen for bread supply for almost 2 years now, maybe a little more.
Wow. Okay. All right. Cool, man. Awesome. That's actually a good way to tie that together. Hey, it's all coming together. Pankil, what about you? You got an interesting story for us?
I do. So, we have this event called the Pantry Short Film Night that we do at our cafe at the last Friday of every month. It started off in quite an interesting manner. I got a note from the pantry written by this girl who makes films and said, I love this space. I want to shoot a film here, a short film here.
Okay.
With Tom Alter, a couple of other well-recognized actors. And we said, okay, sounds good. So she did. Mm-hmm. And she made a short film out of it. And she said, why don't we showcase this at the pantry? I would like to showcase this. We'll do a screening at the pantry. Right. We'll call everybody in. And I'm like, yeah, sure, that works. So we did the screening. It turned out really great. And then we're like, why don't we provide a platform for people to showcase short films? Right. Because a full-length feature film has the platform available for lots of directors to showcase their work. But for short films, there nothing existed. There was no platform per se. This is again 4 years ago in Colaba, which is a very creative neighborhood. Has a lot of creatively inclined people visiting, and we are a cafe in Colaba, and a cafe is essentially a communal place, a place where communities can come and meet. And so we started the short film night, and it's been going full. It's free of cost, and it's really helped develop our brand as well over the last 4 years.
See, I think what this is kind of actually probably the greatest takeaway for people. I asked all four of you for stories around marketing and this, and we got such varied kind of activities. Dallas spoke about creating an artistic concept. Gauri spoke about basically figuring out how to do what they're doing and turn that into a new experience altogether. Abhishek spoke about creating a food festival. You spoke about creating a short film festival. Or a short film night. I think that demonstrates more than anything else that, the kind of things that you can do for marketing a restaurant is essentially infinite. You just got to kind of figure out the right thing that works for you, which is what I think you guys kept telling me over and over again. Mm-hmm. But great. So, wow, Gauri, marketing a restaurant's got to be really, really expensive.
Yeah, that and everything else about restaurants. So this is actually why you want to tune in to the next episode, which is all about raising investment for a restaurant.
Awesome. That's going to be a lot of fun to hear about. And in the meantime, guys, please also make sure that you're following us on social media. If you want to follow the Misty restaurant, that's Misty Colaba on Instagram or Twitter. Gauri is at G Devi Dayal on Instagram. And also please make sure you're following IVM Podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook.
How aware do you think you are of your laws and rights? Do you look up to laws when you are caught up in situations? Do you know what your rights are when you're stuck somewhere bad? Well, here's a show that can help you move an inch closer to being aware of what your rights are. Tune into Know Your Qanoon with me, Amber Rana. This is a podcast meant to answer all your law-related queries. Catch Know Your Qanoon every week on the IVM website or the app or anywhere you get your podcast from.
Yeah. It's IVM here, let's go. We the IVM kids on the block over here. Just to talk, taking a break from producing all day. Coming on this podcast cause we got stuff to say. IVM Daily is the name of the show. Monday to Friday, we ready to go. Talking about stuff in our head. We might even talk about our favorite bread. Signing out, it's IVM here, the podcast network that's in your ear.
Catch IVM Daily Monday to Friday on the IVM Podcast app or wherever you get your podcasts.